Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 22nd of October 2015, just after 1 o'clock, and welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host this afternoon, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. And we've got a very mixed bag of weather reports at the moment. Let's have a look. Cloudy in Plymouth, that's the important thing because it affects us directly. We think it's pretty cloudy in Holland as well. It's sunny in Pembrokeshire, so those corgis doing well today. But overcast in North Yorks, and I'm afraid it's gloomy Glasgow, apparently. So our commiserations if you're living north of the border. Well, we'd have to say that anyway because of the emerging Scottish dictatorship. But sad news from you, Mike, I think.
Well, we're going to start off just mentioning Michael Meacher because, of course, it goes without saying that we didn't agree with him on quite a number of issues, not least climate change, sustainability kind of things that he was into. Nonetheless, he was an avid supporter of Glass-Steagall, for example. And in 2013, of course, he was the man who managed to get Kenneth Clarke onto the floor of the House of Commons to discuss the Bilderberg group. I have to say, we're going to show a short 2-minute clip in a second of Malcolm and Mark Anderson speaking to him. I have to say that my observation is that there was no arrogance about this man, unlike many of the other MPs that I've met over the years. He was approachable, he was willing to speak, and so one of the nice guys, I think. But here we are, we'll show the, sorry.
Should we set the scene? This was shot at Bilderberg.
Yeah, this was shot at Bilderberg at the Grove Hotel, well, the first question is self-explanatory.
Is this the formation of a shadow government, shadow global government? Is this the formation of it?
Well, you're putting it in fairly colourful language. I wouldn't quite go as far as that, but I certainly think that a gathering like this does have that kind of aura about it. It is a shadow institution to which the rest of us do not have access, but which includes people in the highest rank within the governance structure.
Bear with me on this one. The UK column says, for example, that they will ostensibly appear to support like a corporate profit tax. Eric Schmidt, the head of Google, has been consorting with the government because Google had a summit here at the Grove Hotel right before Bilderberg. And what they say is there's like a sleight of hand that goes on. In other words, they'll say, we need a corporate tax, and they'll get the people riled up to say, yes, we got to tax those nasty corporations, but then they can avoid it through their clout and through their loopholes, and then the tax will be settled down on the small businessman, yes, the middle class, the lower classes. In other words, they don't exactly avoid taxes, they refit them for the rest of us. What do you think about that kind of sleight of hand?
I think that's very likely. I think they want to continue to avoid as much as they possibly can, but as a fallback, plan B, they'll do the kind of thing you've been talking about.
What's the legality of using the public purse to pay for the security and the police?
Well, my understanding is, what I have been told, is that the Bilderberg Association has funded the security here,
as well as the police on the public streets.
Yeah, yes, yeah. I mean, Bilderberg. These are all. Well, I say all. Most of them are multimillionaires, or probably all multimillionaires. Many of them billionaires. The idea they have a charity in order to fund G4S to keep the public out, I think, is a wicked.
It's really rather strange.
What's the word?
There's an irony to it.
Well, there's an irony, but it's a distortion, of course, what charities are all about.
So that was Michael Meacher, who passed away yesterday.
Blue sky, though, Mike.
Indeed. Right, so moving on to current events, we've got John Mann here, having been passed, according to the Telegraph, the dossier, the same dossier that, or at least one of them, which Dickens had been passed and had in turn passed to Leon Britton, from where it went to places unknown. John Mann saying that he was given this by the same individual who had given it to Geoffrey Dickens in the 1980s, and he's going to pass it on to the Metropolitan Police. So the question, I suppose, that we were discussing earlier, Brian, was will this dossier be complete? Is it as it was passed to Mr. Dickens, or has it been sanitized?
Well, this is the question, isn't it? Because miraculous, this document suddenly pops up And I'm afraid with a bit of cynicism, I thought to myself, and has it been carefully doctored to remove any real incriminating information? And then, of course, after the Leon Britton put down by BBC Panorama, we can have presumably the BBC crowing that there was no substance in that dossier either. So I'm highly suspicious of this, but we'll wait and see what Mr. Mann does with it.
Yes, so what's next?
Well, where that takes us is to the Goddard Inquiry on child abuse, and I'm absolutely delighted that I have literally just had a reply back into the inquiry. Over a number of months, I have been asking Justice Goddard what she is going to do to protect child abuse whistleblowers, and we've been citing the case of Melanie Shaw. Melanie Shaw, of course, the Beechwood Children's Home in Nottingham whistleblower, and ever since Melanie has blown the whistle, she has been hounded, victimised, bullied by the very authorities, of course, who allowed the abuse to be committed in the first place. So we wrote to the inquiry and we asked for a simple reply, pointing out that under Justice Goddard's own terms of reference, she had a duty to care for people who were coming forward. Well, we couldn't get an answer from the judge. We kept getting an answer from a member of the Information and Engagement Hub, in fact, the lady running it, Mendez. And what did she have to say? Well, in this latest letter, of course, we've got exactly what we need, because she says, one, that the chair has read my letter. Now, this lady never refers to Justice Goddard in person. It's always done as the chair. So is Justice Goddard a chair? Well, we assume she is. We assume she's this chair, but we don't know. But finally, the chair has read the correspondence. And here's the reply. I understand your concerns, but unfortunately, the inquiry does not have the express duty of care to individuals to which you refer, although, of course, we understand the need to engage sensitively with victims and survivors and other members of the public. Now, the letter at the beginning says something about you may be disappointed with this response, but actually I'm not disappointed, because here the inquiry is telling us in no uncertain terms that, of course, the thing is a scam. So they are investigating the police, they're investigating local authorities, they're investigating charities, supposedly, for their failure to protect children from abuse. And when you report to them a case where day by day that abuse has continued, all the inquiry says it's going to do is refer the case back to the very police system that is conducting the victimisation of the child abuse whistleblower in the first place. So this letter, I think, is absolutely key. It shows that the Goddard Inquiry is a scam, and we have now the fact that, of course, all of that information team around Justice Goddard are provided by Theresa May and the Home Secretary's Department itself, so there is absolutely no independence. And then we have NSPCC acting as the big fishing net, taking the calls coming into this independent inquiry. So there we have it. If you are a child abuse victim, if you're a whistleblower, and you come forward with evidence, do not expect the Goddard Inquiry to protect you, because they will simply refer your case back to the very authorities who've failed you in the first place. It's outrageous, Mike. I can't think of any other word to express it. However, slowly but surely the truth is coming out. And of course, let us remember that the Goddard Inquiry is not yet fully set up. They're still arranging themselves, and they have still to answer the question, who was directly responsible for the IT systems from which the evidence was miraculously lost or destroyed. We believe the Home Office was responsible for those systems, but to date, no reply from the inquiry itself. Well, if that isn't bad enough, and we often say we don't make up the news, we don't have to, just have a look at this, because following the tragic and brutal death of Sheku Bayoh in Police Scotland custody, What is the Home Office? What is the Home Secretary doing? Well, this is the announcement. She's announced a new chair for deaths in custody review. And who would you choose to do this? Well, we cannot make this up. Here we've got Dame Eilish Angiolini, the woman who refused to get involved and engaged in the investigation of the abuse of Holly Gregg. Massive attack on Robert Greene for trying to expose the failure of Grampian police and others to investigate that child abuse case. Then this is the lady brought in to advise the Met Police on their rape policy. We've now got a brutal death in custody. Who do we bring back in? Eilish Angiolini. I get a mental picture here of the cowboy wagons drawn in a ring on the plain, Mike, and they are now so desperate to protect the establishment, they have to bring in a safe pair of hands at every opportunity.
Indeed, she is the cover-up queen.
Cover-up queen, it would appear, yeah. Well, we'll leave our viewers and listeners to comment on that. But if we think that's bad, I think you're going to bring in true evil.
Evil indeed. This is what is being described as evil by themselves, actually. English Votes for English Laws. So by splitting it, this is just reinforcing the point we've been making for quite a long time now. By splitting up the union, we are strengthening it, apparently. And of course, there is a whole row about this because, of course, the Scottish nationalists oppose the plans for English votes, for English laws and so on. And it's all just designed to encourage the fractiousness and the faction fighting around the whole devolution thing, so they can slide the devolution agenda in while everybody's so busy fighting with each other.
Well, I've got to say, this is satanic language, isn't it? Because basically what you are doing is the exact opposite of what you are saying that you're doing. We're seeing this in policy documents. It's coming out of the mouths of our politicians. Utter, barefaced lies, hypocrisy, duplicity. Isn't that the satanic agenda? Maybe we'll get some response to that. We'll see.
Well, of course, yesterday we discussed the resurgence of city-states, not a local UK devolution policy, but a long-term global policy, which is really the point we were trying to make, which is currently being implemented here. As part of this, this is part of the global governance infrastructure, of course, that we've been discussing for many years. So I thought I should highlight this. Strong cities. So look at the tagline, inspiring local resilience on a global scale. And that kind of reflects, does it not, the Agenda 21 sort of think globally, act locally tagline. So the Strong Cities Network, that was launched on the 29th of September this year at the United Nations. It's a global network of local authorities united in building resilience to prevent violent extremism, apparently. So the extremist agenda being used to drive this feudalist city-state policy. So the Strong Cities Network aims to protect cities, they say, and other local authorities on an international basis to enhance local level approaches to prevent violent extremism, including facilitating information sharing, mutual learning, and creation of new and innovative local practices. So we're using the so-called violent extremism risk to drive all this integration between cities. And you can find out more about this Strong Cities Network at their website. So the membership of the network, you'll be pleased to know, is free of charge, by the way, but you've got to be a local authority representative or a practitioner operating at city, municipal, or subnational levels. Now, the Strong Cities Network will connect city-level practitioners and the communities they represent through a series of workshops, training, and sustained city partnerships. Network participants will also contribute to and benefit from an online repository of municipal-level good practices and web-based training modules, and will be eligible for grants supporting innovative local initiatives and strategies that will contribute to building social cohesion and resilience to violent extremism. So what you're seeing here is global governance brought down to the local level right across the planet. So every city will operate using the same best practice, which these unnamed people, because if you look at their website and you look at the About Us section, there's no explanation about who is actually behind this. There are no names. There are no governance documents. But they are pumping this policy directly into cities and the new city-states. And they go on to say the SCN will include an international steering committee of approximately 25 cities and other subnational entities from different regions that will provide the SCN with strategic direction. The SCN will also convene an international advisory board which includes representatives from relevant city-focused networks to help ensure SCN builds upon their work. It will be run by the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, a leading international think and do think tank with long-standing track record of working to prevent violent extremism. So keep it in mind, think globally, act locally.
And a pretty dark website, Mike.
Very dark website.
That's the image from the website. That's not a UK column manipulated image. That's the dark, very dark, I'd say oppressive image in that. Well, if that's what they're telling us is coming, it's coming. And if we go from a global example to a local example, I think a few people are going to need to brace themselves for this. We're going to go actually to Cornwall. And I've just used this header as an example because it's about free early education. We're talking preschool, 2-year-olds. So the little banner there is actually from Stoke, but what we're going to talk about is from Cornwall. And this is the subject. It's Sennen Preschool, which recently sent out a letter to parents, which is astonishing, so astonishing that people came all the way from Cornwall to bring it to the UK column for us to talk to people about it. So let's have a look at this letter. I'm going to read it through. It says, Sennen Preschool has a duty under the law to help prevent the radicalisation of children and adults and or children and adults being exposed to extreme views. Prevent duty guidance defines radicalism as being the act or process of making a person more radical or favouring of extreme or fundamental changes in political, economic or social conditions, institutions or habits of the mind. This guidance defines extremism as the holding of extreme political or religious views. As part of our prevent duty, all staff are expected to uphold and promote the fundamental principles of British values, including democracy, the rule of law, individual liberty and mutual respect and tolerance of those with different faiths and beliefs. If staff have any concerns that an individual may be vulnerable to being drawn into and exploited by violent and extreme ideologies, we will contact our local authority prevent coordinator for guidance on how to respond appropriately. We will work in partnership with prevent coordinators, channel police, and if we can blow the next bit up here, practitioners, channel police, practitioners and the local Safeguarding Children Board. Staff at preschool have an obligation to report any concerns relating to radicalisation or extremism of children and or adults. If you require further information, please refer to our safeguarding policy or Prevent Duty 2015. And I'm just going to highlight this little bit here, the channel police they're talking about. That's nothing to do with the English Channel, it's far worse. People shocked, Mike, to receive this letter where you've just put your 2-year-old into a preschool in Cornwall, not known for its extremist agenda, and suddenly your child is going to be screened in case the 2-year-old is a radical extremist or the parents are.
Yeah, well, of course, what they're looking for isn't it that children have a tendency to bring their home life into school.
Indeed.
And so what we're in fact doing is training our preschool teachers and primary school teachers to spy for the state.
That's exactly what we're doing. And I've just picked up one of the comments in our chat room, and the word is bonkers. And I'm going to say this is absolutely not bonkers. This is calculated government policy. It is highly dangerous. And it is very wrong for us to describe this as madness or ridiculous. It is anything but. Let's have a look at it.
Just before we do, I'll just mention The Moral Maze, which was on Radio 4 last night at 8 o'clock. and I didn't listen to it, so I don't know what was said. Maybe somebody else can comment on it. But basically, I heard the trailer for it, and what they were talking about was exactly this. The fact that they were going to be discussing the moral dilemma posed by the fact that more and more people are being asked in the UK to spy on behalf of the state. And really, we are turning into East Germany on a daily basis.
But of course far worse because of the technology being employed. So let's have a look at this Prevent and see what it is that has got into preschool and is interested in your 2-year-old. Well, here's the government page, Protecting Children from Radicalisation, the Prevent Duty. There it is, duty. It's an onus. Citizens must carry out their duty. Well, what do we need to see next? Well, let's have a little bit of a look at what they're talking about. There's an actual Prevent Duty document. You can download this. I'm going to encourage everybody to download this document and read it because it is so dangerous and so sinister. So here we are, documental advice for schools and childcare providers, June 2015. And I've taken a couple of pieces out of it that we think are particularly interesting. Here's the risk assessment. The statutory guidance makes clear that schools and childcare providers are expected to assess the risk of children being drawn into terrorism, including support for extremist ideas that are part of terrorist ideology. This means being able to demonstrate both a general understanding of the risks affecting children and young people in the area and a specific understanding of how to identify individual children who may be at risk of radicalisation and what to do to support them. So you're a preschool carer and teacher, and the British government now thinks that you've got to be fully trained in assessing terrorist threats. This is very, very dangerous stuff. And have a look at what they say extremism is about. Vocal or active opposition to fundamental British values, including democracy, the rule of law, individual liberty, mutual respect. So that was put into the preschool document. They're trying to cover themselves. We also include in our definition of extremism calls for the deaths of members of our armed forces, whether in this country or overseas. Terrorist groups very often draw on extremist ideas developed by extremist organisations. Now, we are going to say that this Prevent strategy is a pernicious policy of lies and propaganda. We've got this. At the same time, schools and childcare providers should be aware of the increased risk of online radicalisation as terrorist organisations such as ISIL seek to radicalise young people through the use of social media and the internet. So here we've got David Cameron's overseas threat, ISIL, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, good terrorists, bad terrorists, brought right into the heart of preschool. The local authority and local police will be able to provide contextual information to help schools and childcare providers understand the risks. So this is drawing preschool into working with the police. You're a preschool teacher, you're now going to work with the police. It goes on. Even very young children may be vulnerable to radicalisation by others, whether in the family or outside, and display concerning behaviour. The Prevent duty does not require teachers or childcare providers to carry out unnecessary intrusion into family life. But as with any other safeguarding risk, they must take action when they observe behaviour of concern. Young children, 2-year-old children, Mike, David Cameron is describing as being potential terrorists.
Yes.
How can we put this across more plainly? Well, let's come back to this intrusion. This bit here, the Prevent duty does not require teachers or childcare providers to carry out unnecessary intrusion into family life, but as with any other safeguarding risk, they must take action when they observe behaviour of concern. So this is a lie, isn't it? Because the whole thing is requiring people to take action and to intrude into family life. And if we go down here, it's not necessary for schools and childcare settings to have distinct policies on implementing it. Well, obviously it is, because they've now been terrorised into following this government policy and protecting themselves. I mean, this is absolutely outrageous. So let's lead on to the channel. Here we are, protecting vulnerable people from being drawn into terrorism. And if you go inside, encourage you to read it yourself. Here's the flow chart of people who are going to be identified. They're going to be screened. We think you're a risk, and no, we don't think you're a risk now, or you're drawn into what is clearly a self-regulating wheel. Once you're in this system, essentially secretive, unaccountable people are the people who decide whether they're going to let you out of the surveillance wheel. This makes Stasi Germany just look like a holiday camp, Mike. We're going to keep going. So here's a bit more. We are saying that the channel is Mapper Light. It's the same thing but by another name. What is the scale of it? We'll look at who's going to get involved: county councils, district councils, borough councils, the Council of the Isles of Scilly, and then we've got NHS, social workers, schools, further education, universities, youth offending, children's services, safeguarding boards, local authority, troubled families, border force, housing, prisons. This makes East Germany just look ridiculous.
I mean, this is about 4 times we said this now, but it really is an incredible... How far this agenda has come without anybody noticing is staggering, isn't it?
It is. Well, we're going to continue to take it apart here, because then people can do the research themselves. But get into the documentation. We thought it'd be interesting to see who the terrorist and domestic extremists are. Well, those convicted of a terrorist act or offence, or terrorist-related offences, have been convicted of an offence of conspiring, attempting, aiding, abetting, counselling, procuring. The offences cover the world, but then we go down here: domestic extremism, animal rights, environmental, far right, far left, not defined, of course.
No.
Is UKIP far right? Maybe. Maybe everybody in UKIP is a domestic extremist. And then this is beautiful, because down here it says emerging trends, or any activities that unduly and illegally influence or threaten the economic and community cohesion of the country. That unduly, well, what's the definition of that?
Does that include sex acts with pigs?
Sex acts with pigs? Well, one would hope so, but I think probably interfering with our porky brethren will be excluded in order to protect senior members of the government. So this is the next lie. An individual's engagement with the programme is entirely voluntary at all stages. Detailed guidance on channel is available. This is a lie, because the PREVENT system, as with MAPPA, is carried out by committees behind closed doors. And once the procedure starts, the target individual is completely unaware that they're being spied on in the first place. And even if they discover, they don't have any right of reply in front of these closed door committees. So that was the wheel I was trying to describe. Once you're drawn into this system, unbelievably dangerous. So if we summarise this to say, how has this policy been put in place by David Cameron and Theresa May, we thought it needed a little bit of a flow chart. This is the start: create fear, terrorism. And this is where the great lie has come from, that all of a sudden we've had everybody who is Muslim is a prospective terrorist. And yet we know that ISIL, ISIS have been created with the help of Western money, US and UK money, and their job was to help bring down the president in Syria. So this is the thing: create the terrorism. What can you do then? Well, you're going to ramp up the fear. So David Cameron here was busy saying that essentially there's going to be a massive ISIL attack on Britain. Ramp up the fear, encourage people to spy on each other, as you've said, Mike. Then we bring in PREVENT, and we're going to target children. And of course, we're not just targeting the children, we're going for their parents. We bring in the channel system, which we're going to call MAPPA Light, and in come the other authorities. And In MAPA itself, you have already got a formalised secret state spying and arrest arrangement, which can also use sectioning under mental health. If anybody has any ideas as to how we could put this across more simply to warn the British public that David Cameron is building one of the most vicious fascist states under our very noses, we would like some guidance. But I think a trail of evidence from a preschool in Cornwall to the fact that we are producing a Stasi-type state is pretty convincing.
I mean, I think as a final point on this, of course, we're not singling out that school for any criticism. Indeed. Particularly, but what I would say is, and I think this applies to people in all kinds of institutions, that I see schools, I see police, I see all kinds of people without any kind of thought implementing policies which I'm quite certain in many cases they understand to be irrational, wrong, extreme,
or bonkers.
Yeah. And they sit back and they do it for fear of losing their jobs. Now, true leadership, of course, isn't the common purpose crap that we are pumped full of these days. True leadership would be if the heads of those schools or those police forces or those institutions got their respective parents or whoever it was and sat them down and had a discussion about what they're being asked to do and actually made a decision as a group about whether it's something they wanted to do or not. I don't see any evidence. The church is absolutely the worst in the world for this. I don't see any evidence of any proper leadership for any of the people that actually serve in leadership roles in our communities.
Well, the mainstream church is infiltrated, Mike. That's a subject for another day, I think. But of course, alongside terrorism, the next great lie is austerity, which brings us to banking.
Well, this is more carnage. Now, a couple of weeks ago, of course, Mark Carney got up and he talked about climate change completely outside his remit, no doubt inspired by his fairly rabidly environmental wife. But anyway, he commented on the climate change debate, and many at the time in the mainstream media were shocked that the governor of the Bank of England would interfere in the political sphere in that way, because that's not his job. And at the time it was unprecedented, but it seems a decision has been taken, and the mouthpiece for the City of London is now going to intervene in all kinds of political debates. So what is it this time? Well, he is talking about Europe, and he's supporting Britain's EU membership. He gave a speech yesterday at Oxford University to tell everybody how much he's supporting it. He was highlighting its economic benefits. He was calling for reforms to ensure that the Union still works with Britain's best interests at heart. Well, in fact, some of the mainstream coverage was suggesting that King David himself had put Mark Carney up to this. But I don't think so, quite the opposite. These are City of London instructions to Cameron is more likely what's going on here. So anyway, he tried to limit the scope of his speech at the beginning by saying our report is solely concerned with how EU membership affects the bank's ability, that's the Bank of England, to achieve our core objectives. It's not a comprehensive assessment of the pros and cons of the UK being in Europe. Well, some people didn't quite agree with that limitation on the scope. But he made it clear that EU membership reinforces the dynamism of the EU economy. A more dynamic economy is more resilient to shocks, can grow more rapidly without generating inflationary pressure or creating risks to financial stability, and can also be associated with more effective competition. So EU membership is good. And EU membership is also good because overall it has increased the openness of the UK economy and facilitated dynamism, but it's also creating some monetary and financial stability challenges for the Bank of England to manage, and so on. So, well, there you go. Needless to say, George Osborne was gushing in his praise for Mark Carney and the intervention that he has done here. But this is not a view held by everybody. Previous Chancellor Nigel Lawson saying, indeed, as I say, these two interventions by Carney in the last few weeks are unprecedented. He's saying I can't think of any previous governor who would wade in a political way in such an issue as this. This is unprecedented, and in my view, the City of London has decided to take a much more hands-on approach to giving out their instructions, rather than simply relying on some journalists to drift them out in their articles.
Yeah, well, I'll come back to my wagons in the circle. I think that the City of London is now having to really show itself because it's losing control of the political agenda. It can't do it through politics anymore. So now we've got the money people acting outside their authority and coming straight in with what they think should be happening politically. So somebody, again, in the chat box has said, well, this is the City of London at work, and I think that's absolutely right.
Yeah.
Well, we've done terrorism, we've done austerity. Of course, David Cameron would have us believe that alongside ISIL, al-Nusra, ISIS, and the bad terrorists, not to be confused with the good terrorists, of course, is the threat of aggression by Russia, which is the key thing we face. And we would have expected, if that were true, that British armed forces would be being built up at the moment. But of course, that's not happening. What we're actually seeing is cuts. Now, it's taken a private member's bill to actually say to the government that there should be a minimum 2% spent. We understand that former banker turned MP Sir General Howarth was going to lead this. He says, sadly, I expect the government to talk out the bill. So we've got this very interesting situation where Cameron is on the world stage fomenting war. He's warning the British people of war. He's warning the British people that we're going to be murdered in our bed by millions of Islamic terrorists. And at the same time, he is cutting Britain's defences. That seems a little bit strange, that, Mike. I always have trouble working out what Mr. Cameron is doing. But of course, the easy answer is that this is what is needed to take us into the European army and a totally combined European military structure. So here's the next clue from the Mail. UK won't go to war alone ever again, says Army Chief. And a Major General has actually said, this is Major General Patrick Saunders, he has actually said it's unthinkable. So we've got this situation at the moment that the British Army's down to sort of 82,000 men. When you take out sort of stores, supplies, backroom support, this is the British Army no longer capable of taking on a sustained operation in Europe, simply doesn't have the men or the equipment. What is this? Well, this has got to be treason, because to leave the state unable to defend itself is treason. I don't know whether Major General Patrick Saunders realises that, but this is the reality of it. But in this article, something remarkable, because it appears that a senior US Army officer has become the first American general to serve in a British Army division. So we know that we've got French military swarming all over Britain's military command and control system, which means, of course, we have no national defence properly. Now, all of a sudden, as the British Army is cut to the bone, we suddenly need American generals. Is that because he's worried that Obama's also cutting the American military, Mike, maybe? He needs a job with us?
Well, we're swapping personnel, aren't we? The question is, there's a bit of a difference between a pilot operating with the US forces and a general, is there not? Yeah. How does that fit into the chain of command?
Well, I've personally never seen anything like it. I would like an explanation from the British government as to what's going on here, but I would rather think we won't get one, much as the same people totally unaware of the extent to which the French military are now integrated with UK armed forces in this country. Highly dangerous, in my opinion.
Now, those nasty Russians have been up to no good again.
Terrible.
Terrible. So more Russian expansionism. And of course, this is Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu. Well, what are they up to? Well, there is this disputed chain of islands between Japan and Russia, the Kuril Islands. And what the Russians have said is that they are now going to build a military base on the Kuril Islands. What's this actually about? Well, of course, this is a reaction once again. This is not proactive Russian military expansionism. This is again a reaction. And in this case, it's a reaction to Japan attempting to change their constitution so that they can start getting involved in military action for other nations. So in this case, the pressure is being put on Japan to change their Constitution, Article 8 of their Constitution, because the US wants Japanese resources available to them when they start attacking Russia and China from the Pacific.
Pacific seaboard.
So in my view, that's what's going on here. This is not, undoubtedly, this is going to be played up in the Western media as being further Russian saber rattling, but quite the opposite, a defensive move. And then is this finally? Yes, I think it is finally TTIP. This is Russian. This is TASS, I suppose. Sputnik, I believe, is run by TASS. Pointing out the TTIP trade talks are continuing in Miami. And they're saying a trade official from America's largest labor union said that chief negotiators of the TTIP agreement persist in showing contempt for transparency this week by failing to provide any meaningful details of the deal's most critical stakeholders. And so they are talking about TTIP. There is no way that we are going to, unless there's a leak from WikiLeaks, but I'm not aware of any leaks through WikiLeaks on the TTIP agenda quite yet. They have leaked the TPP, but that was once it was more or less a done deal. So we've got to wait and see what TTIP includes. I'm quite sure it won't be so different from TPP, and will include much of the same kind of nasty stuff.
Absolutely right, Mike. Almost lost for words on how quickly things are unfolding. And if you step back from it a little bit, do your research, you can see all these pieces coming into play. Money, of course, a key part of it. The lie of austerity driving all of the change agenda, which is bringing in this globalization and giving power to these city-states. I mean, it's a horror film, isn't it, to think of Boris Johnson in charge of your city.
No, I did see in the chat box one or two people suggesting that Russia and China are really our only hope to prevent this agenda marching on. But of course, they're not our only hope. Each of us as individuals has a part to play in this.
That's absolutely true. And on that note, we'll thank everybody who attended our meeting at the George pub in Plimpton last night. As always, fascinating discussion with the information that people brought forward. But perhaps today we will mention the youngest member present, who was telling us of his frustration at having spent £1,000 to get a qualification in plastering, then to discover that industry would not accept that qualification from one of Plymouth's local colleges. He also went on to say that it was becoming clear that soon you would need a qualification in order to become a labourer. What went hand in glove with this is that, of course, people coming in from other areas of Europe are walking straight onto building sites, not producing any certification that's being required for people living in UK. So who created that system? Not people who are migrating to UK. This is coming from the British government. So if we want to know who's attacking us, we should start looking at the City of London and Westminster. That's it from us for today. Thank you very much for joining us. If you like what we do, please consider subscribing or donate. It's only with your support that we can do what we do. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
See you tomorrow.